Welcome to this week's episode of Here We Journey with Pastor Greg. I'm glad to be back. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the cost of doing what's right, the cost of speaking out against injustice, and what may happen when you do that. So, I am a pastor within a mainline Protestant denomination, and this past week has been rough. There has been division in my denomination, division in a more area-based part of our denomination, and it's been hard on everyone. It's been hard regardless of what side you have found yourself on. And I say side because there were really two sides that were at play. And yeah, there was some middle ground there, but it was still a very divisive situation. And it pitted two marginalized groups against each other in some ways. It also put those of us that are allies and trying to do certain work that is necessary not only in the church but in our nation, and that's anti-racism work, in a tough spot, in a difficult spot. On one hand, we were trying to call a action that was taken, and the lack of proper procedure and the delivery of the action, calling that out as wrong and tainted with systemic racism at play, as well as recognizing that on top of that there is an issue related to the LGBTQIA plus community. So those of us that find ourselves where we are trying to, in many ways, be allies, which is a term that I don't usually use when applying it to myself. I have no problem with others calling me an ally. I very often shy away about using that term for myself because I recognize I am going to mess up. I haven't gotten it all figured out. I am going to stumble and I am going to fail, and I'm going to have to ask for forgiveness. And I still do everything I can to the best of my understanding to walk alongside and to stand for justice for both marginalized groups that are impacted by anti feelings. So after much consideration, after reading so many documents, after really trying to listen to both sides, came out and felt convicted to say what happened and the way it was done, and many of the surrounding events, whether intended to or not, had racism in play. I'm not saying the person or the people committing or doing these actions are racist. I'm saying there was racism, and there's a difference that we can talk about maybe at another day. There was racism at play. I felt convicted to speak out. And ultimately, sadly, it did cost me something. So far, it has cost me a relationship with a clergy member from another denomination who said a few things to me that I won't repeat here, but let's just say they made their feelings very well known, and it made me sad. I had supported this person. I had tried to stand with them when they were going through some difficult times, and yet, in this situation, because of how I spoke out, it cost me that relationship. So far, that's been the only cost of me speaking out. I pray that there isn't additional, more severe costs. I'm still in the process of trying to get my next call. I've been in my current synod, which is close to the synod where a lot of this ground zero was based at, since December. I have faith, I have trust, and I know that there are things happening at play, but I also recognize that there was a potential for additional costs to happen. And yet I had to speak out. I felt convicted. I've also now been blocked by this public figure who committed some of these, or committed the initial acts and has been at the epicenter of the controversy. That's okay. Only someone that has more ecclesiastical standing than me. So there could, again, be some blowback. But sometimes when we stand up and speak out, we have to recognize that we do so, and there is risk. There is the potential that it could have a negative impact on us. I'll give you another example. There was a time where, while I was in seminary, there was another controversy. This time, an individual was hired to be the president of the seminary that was merged from the two most historic seminaries in my denomination, two seminaries that were affirming of our LGBTQIA plus communities and our members. Well, come to find out, this person, while they had renounced this, had worked and advocated for conversion therapy. That did not sit well because it was not until after the fact that this was brought up. Now, I don't want to bore too many of you guys with this whole process, but it's important to know that I wouldn't have completed my process to be approved to be ordained. So within my denomination, when you first enter into seminary, you are what's called entranced by a committee in your sponsoring synod. And that's basically okay, you can go, you can start this journey, we support you in this, we'll give it a shot. Then eventually you will reach what's called endorsement, which says, okay, you're doing good, we don't see any super red flags, keep going, go to internship and finish up your studies, and at the end, somewhere at the end of the first semester of your final year or the beginning of your beginning of the spring semester of your final year, you will sit and with this committee from your home synod and go through approval. And this is where you're ultimately told, yes, you can be ordained. Now, if you're a full-time student, this means that you will have almost completely completed 3 years of academic study plus an internship, a year-long internship. So you're looking at about 4 years of your time dedicated and ultimately, in many ways, leading up to this meeting. Now, I was in between my approval and my endorsement. So I had been endorsed. I hadn't been approved yet. I was getting ready to start my internship, and I was called as a elected official on the student body to make comment at the board of directors meeting revolving and trying to deal with this controversy. Now, on the board of directors of the synod sat two bishops that could have very easily told my home bishop there's an issue with this candidate. But I remember I prayed the entire drive over, about an hour and a half drive, 2 hours. And I prayed and I prayed and I thought, what can I say? Because the marginalized, or the group that was most hurt, was not my group, was not a group that I am a member of. I am a supporter of. I walk alongside, again, not using that term, but I've been told I am an ally, or at least I am considered an ally to specific individuals. So how can I speak on that when I don't have first-hand experience of the hurt? I certainly saw it. I saw it in the faces of my classmates. But I remember looking each board member in the eye, including the two bishops, and saying, I don't trust you. And I'm not the only one. There's been hurt. There's been harm done. And I pray that you listen to the LGBTQIA plus community voices. I pray that you listen to the BIPOC voices that are speaking out. I pray that you listen to their voices more than mine. That's what I'm using my voice for. To tell you that trust has been broken, and you need to listen to what these other groups are saying. And I said this knowing, again, that I was putting myself at risk. What about a non-church related situation? Well, there was a time where I was working for a nonprofit, and the director at the time was doing some things, nothing illegal, but just doing some things that didn't sit right with me. That really bothered me to the core. I had talked with my wife. I said, I don't know. Now, I was the event planner, the event coordinator, volunteer coordinator, the leadership guy. I really enjoyed that job. But it was starting to eat away at me. So I had a meeting. I said, here are my concerns. Here are some things that maybe you guys as the board of directors should be aware of and at least keep an eye out for. Now, I don't know what happened after that meeting, but in a very short amount of time after that, I was no longer employed at that nonprofit. I was never given a reason. So I can only guess that raising my concerns, trying to stand for what was right, played a factor. So that time it did cost me my job. a very real, and that's around when my first baby was born. Shortly after she was born is when I took this job. So she was young. I lost a job. Standing for what is right, yes, can oftentimes have, I don't want to use the word reward, results that are very, very positive. We can be celebrated. Maybe it means that we are lifted up in some way, shape, or form. And yet other times, it comes with a very real cost. I think about that, the fact that it's the beginning of Pride Month. And how many times have people stood up alongside of our LGBTQIA plus community and faced repercussions? How many times have people spoken out and faced repercussions? It happens. It's not always sunshine and rainbows when we stand for what is right. Sometimes it comes back to bite us. Sometimes it has a negative impact. And we must be aware of that. That's why I want to talk to you guys about this tonight. Is to say, we need to be aware of this. We have this idea, I think, in our brains where we will be lauded as heroes, or as, well, at least get a pat on the back for standing up, or at least other people will see that we are some way, shape, or form of high moral character and value. That's not always the case, though. So we have to ask ourselves, is it still worth it? Is it worth it to do what is right and to raise our voices if there's going to be a negative consequence? Some would probably say no. You know what? If it doesn't directly impact me, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and keep moving forward. Self-preservation, right? Or it is entirely possible that someone may want to speak out, but they can't. Maybe they're a single parent and they can't risk losing their job. There's situations like that. There are other situations similar to that, where speaking out might have too high of a cost. So it's up to people that, yes, may have something to lose, but maybe not as much to lose, to speak out, to raise our voices, to voice our concerns, and to try, going back to the very first situation I was describing with this area of my mainline Protestant denomination, to first push initially for some sort of common resolution. Some way that things can happen, and the things that need to happen can happen, while still protecting others. Or at least not causing harm to marginalized groups. Or at least not continuing the harm that has already been done. There are ways where we can respond to injustice or wrongs that can mitigate the damage that is done. Or there are ways that we can respond that will simply exasperate the harm that is done I think for me, I always try to approach it in a way of saying, okay, what is the best case scenario here? Certainly offering grace to the one that has caused the harm is necessary. But that grace can't be a cheap grace. That grace must be followed along with something. Maybe that grace is followed along with a 5-point plan of, this is what I am going to do to learn from this, to hold myself accountable. Here are some safeguards I am putting in place so this won't happen again. And I'm going to authentically apologize. Sometimes it's as simple as that. That doesn't mean the work is simple. That doesn't mean the work's going to be easy. But there is a way then that both people or both parties can come out of it renewed and restored, and healing can take place. But healing can only take place when we name what needs to be healed. You go to the doctor's office, right? A good doctor. Say you go there with a broken bone. If the doctor doesn't name it and say, hey, you got a broken bone, we need to do X, Y, and Z, will there ever be a restoration back to full health? Will you ever be restored where that bone ever heal? There's other medical terminology that could be used. Sometimes you have to cut a boil or a wound in order for new growth to happen and let it heal on its own. So it can be painful. With the broken bone, you may have to set it. And if you've had this broken bone set, that hurts. Surgeries hurt. There is pain that is endured and that you must go through. And then there is the healing process. Even after a relatively minor surgery, there's aftercare that must be done. There are things that must be done in order to assure that you are fully healed, or at least as fully as possible, heal from what your body has gone through. In many ways, when we talk about standing for justice, it's the same concept. Yes, oftentimes people like myself who are trying to live into a more just world and bring about more equality and equity and make this world a better place than what we found it, many times we get caught up in the just naming the problem. Many times we get caught up in the speaking out, which we need to do, and can oftentimes be where we encounter the greatest risk to ourselves. But then comes the next part. And that next part is asking authentically and intentionally, how can we build restoration and healing? Now, we can't rush to this part, which we often sometimes do. I shouldn't say often, sometimes that's a little bit of going back and forth, but we often do try to jump to the healing, to the everything's okay again, and not put in the work and do the things necessary to bring about real healing and real change. And that's hard too. There's a little bit less cost, at least high cost associated with that. It may be hard work still, but we may not be putting our livelihoods at risk. We may not be putting relationships at risk. Now, there might be things that come through the work that we are doing after we name a thing that result in relationships changing. We may ultimately decide I can't continue doing what I do as my vocation because of the work that I have done through this process to reach restoration and healing. See, there's a process there. And we can't really skip any of the processes. And it's a hard process to get started because how many times do we speak out and we speak out and we just feel like we're saying the same thing over and over and over again. We see the same stuff happening over and over and over again. And we get tired. We get fed up with it. It feels like we're running up against a brick wall each and every time. But we must keep speaking. We must keep doing it. Recognizing that it's going to take time. Recognizing that there comes a cost with it. And recognizing that it's just the beginning of the process. You see, initiating social change, initiating systemic change, dealing with some of the sins in society and in institutions that we have is hard work. It really is. And maybe you're sitting here thinking, Pastor, I don't got time for this. I don't have the bandwidth. I can't do it. And I can understand that. I can. Trust me, I can. And yet there are still times when you listen. And maybe when you take a step back. Or something is just gnawing on you. Is making your heart heavy. Maybe you feel a knot in the pit of your stomach. Maybe it's a thought that keeps circling in your head. And you just can't get away from it. I didn't necessarily want to add my voice to what was happening in another synod. I'll be honest with that. There was a part of me that was like, it's just keep your mouth shut, Greg. It doesn't impact you directly. And yet I couldn't. I kept thinking about the vows I made when I was ordained. I kept thinking about those times where people of good faith and good courage and good morals didn't speak out and the results that happened. So I said something. And I've continued to say something. And I've emailed the powers that be asking questions. Recognizing that there might come a time where this comes back and gets me. But you know what? I can look in the mirror. I can pray. And I can feel that I have done what has been put in front of me. And that's important. So when you have those thoughts, when you have that knot in your stomach, or that crick in your neck, sometimes that comes when you're tense because there's something that's just bothering you. There's an injustice that's eating away at you. There's something that is making you emotionally charged that you haven't said anything about. You haven't taken a stand. You haven't publicly taken a stand and added your name to the list of people that are trying to address it. And if you haven't done it before and you're hearing my words, the first time is scary. It is. I remember the first time I went in a social justice protest march. It was against what's called Christian nationalism. And I was amongst thousands of people. And there was secure, it was probably as safe of a situation as it could be, but yet there was an uneasiness within me. I knew what I was doing was right. I was still scared. Those stories earlier that I shared, I was still scared. I was still nervous. My voice did shake a little bit. The most recent one, I'm still a little bit scared. I'm still a little bit worried. But yet, I'm going to get a little religious here. Jesus did not tell us life would be without those times. Look at what happened to the 12 disciples. And you can see what a life lived following Jesus can result in. Only one died because of old age. So I hope, maybe, if there is something that's been bothering you, that you feel like you want to say something about, an injustice in our society, in an institution, that maybe hearing my completely honest and real thoughts about this, I pray maybe will encourage you by first recognizing what you're feeling, that it's scary, but also saying, look, it will be okay. Even if there is a cost. When we stand for what is right, when we stand against injustice, we come away with something better. We come away with a feeling of, I did what I was called to do. I lived into the golden rule. I lived into the love our neighbors. Because when we love our neighbors, when we tell our neighbors and our friends that we love them, and we see an injustice that's impacting them or a community that they belong to, we have to stand. And the feeling, the sense that you get when you do it, and you can look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what? That was hard. That was difficult. That was scary. I'm still scared and nervous, but I did what was right. That's a feeling that no one can take away from you. That's a confirmation that you did what you were called to do. That's the Spirit, if you're religious or spiritual, saying, yes, beloved, you did the task at hand, and you did a well done, good and faithful servant. So I pray that you do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same causes I stand up for. That's okay. Maybe you're passionate about animal welfare. Great. I think all animals should be well cared for. Is it a passion of mine? I'll be honest, no. But maybe it's a passion of yours, or maybe that's what's eating away at you and gnawing at you and saying you need to do something. to speak out against this. Maybe it's the way neurodivergent people are treated. There's a lot of causes out there. There's a lot of injustices out there, imbalances in society. If there's one that bothers you, speak out. Add your voice. Follow the Spirit. Follow that gut feeling that you have. It will be okay. Eventually. You will, most importantly, survive it. You will live through it. Whatever the cost that comes with it, if there is a cost, you will be able to weather that storm. I have belief in that. I trust in that. So, my friends, I ask you, how can you make this world a better place? What injustice can you stand against? How can you speak out? What's something you will speak out about? Either in your community or in an institution that you are part of, or on the more national stage. What is it? And how will you do it? Will you do it on social media? Which we know there are struggles with social media, but social media can be a great place to at least start some of this work. How are you going to do it? Be well. Change this world. And as always, know that you make this world a better place simply by being in it. You are valued, you are loved, you are appreciated. The world would be missing something great if you weren't here. Thank you for being you. Thank you for what you contribute to this world. You are loved.